The Ariadne's thread drifted through the velvet dark at the edge of the void, its hull scarred by the mundane hazards of a decade in service. Inside, the air smelled of recycled oxygen and old coffee. Senior Xenologist Elara Voss pressed her palm against the observation window, watching the station grow from a point of light into a thing of impossible grace. The memory vault did not gleam like human metal. It pulsed, a slow rhythm of bioluminescence rippling through chitin and woven fiber, organic as a heart. It looked alive. The Orvani had built this place. They were an ancient species of archivists, their bodies made of pale light and their minds linked in a vast collective. "Still time to back out," said Commander Bryce from behind her, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man who had seen too many things go wrong. Elara did not turn. "The Orvani invited us. We invited ourselves. Turning back now would be a statement we can't unsay." "A statement of caution," he said. "The galaxy's oldest archivists, and they want to play show and tell with our brains." She smiled. "That's not what Torin said." Torin had said many things during the initial hail. The Orvani representative spoke in a voice that felt less like sound and more like warmth spreading through the chest. Their language was not spoken so much as resonated, each word a harmonic that vibrated in the listener's bones. Elara had recorded the transmission 12 times, trying to understand how a being of soft light could sound so patient, so utterly without guile. The docking sequence took an hour. Orvani stations did not have airlocks in the human sense. They had membranes, living tissues that parted like eyelids to admit the ship. Elara felt the Ariadne's thread shudder as the station's surface sealed around them, a brief pressure that was almost maternal. Inside, the corridor walls breathed. Slow expansions and contractions, the texture of smooth bark warmed by sun. Soft light came from no visible source, just the walls themselves, a gentle amber that made shadows feel friendly. Torin waited at the junction. Their form was humanoid only in the loosest sense, a column of pale luminescence, arms that trailed into filaments, a face that resolved into features when they chose to speak. Elara had learned to read the shifting patterns, peaceful, curious, hopeful. "Senior Xenologist Voss," Torin said, and the warmth of their voice filled the corridor. "We are honored. Your people's stories have traveled far ahead of you." Elara inclined her head. "We've heard the same of the Orvani. The memory vault is said to hold the history of 1,000 species." 10,000, Torin corrected, and the filaments around their face shimmered with something like amusement. "But we do not count. Counting implies value. We remember because memory is the only thing that survives the end of things." Commander Bryce shifted his weight. Elara could feel his unease like a static charge. She ignored it. Torin led them deeper into the station. The corridors opened into chambers that defied human geometry, spaces that seemed larger inside than outside, walls that curved in directions that made the eye ache. The Orvani did not use furniture. They used fields, invisible cushions of pressure that supported a body without touching it. Elara sat in one, feeling the strange sensation of floating while remaining perfectly still. The others from her crew arranged themselves around her, a half-circle of nervous humans in a room that hummed with ancient patience. "You wish to understand us," Torin said, settling into a field of their own. Their light dimmed slightly as if preparing for a story. "And we wish to understand you. This is the foundation of peace, but words are clumsy. They carry the shape of meaning, not the meaning itself." "What do you propose?" Elara asked. Torin extended a filament toward the center of the room. A sphere of light bloomed there, pale blue, rotating slowly. "Our dream projector," they said. "It creates a shared dreamscape, a space where two minds can meet without the filter of language. You would experience our history, our myths, our joys and our griefs as we felt them." Elara leaned forward. "Direct experience, you're talking about a psionic link." "A gentle one," Torin said. "You remain yourself, you simply visit. Think of it as reading a book, except the book remembers being written. The ultimate act of diplomatic trust. We offer you our inner lives. In return, you offer us yours." Commander Bryce cleared his throat. "That's a lot to ask on a first date." Torin's light flickered. "We do not date, but we understand the metaphor. You are afraid of losing yourself in another mind. This fear is reasonable. I promise you, the dream projector is safe. Thousands of species have used it. None have been lost." Elara looked at her crew. Dr. Inez looked intrigued. Specialist Rico looked skeptical. Commander Bryce looked like he was calculating the distance to the airlock. "I'll do it," Elara said, her voice carrying a quiet resolve that silenced the room. Bryce turned to her. "Elara, "We came here to make contact," she said. "Real contact, not handshakes and trade agreements. If the Orvani are offering us a window into their soul, I'm going to look through it." Torin's filaments brightened. "You are brave, senior xenologist. That is a quality we admire." The preparation took 10 minutes. Elara lay on a field that cradled her spine, her arms at her sides. Torin instructed her to close her eyes, to breathe slowly, to think of nothing. The dream projector's light intensified, a soft blue that she could see even through her eyelids. Then the light became everything. She was standing on a shore. The ocean was not water. It was crystal, a vast plain of faceted blue that caught a sun she could not see and scattered it into a million rainbows. The air smelled of salt and ozone and something floral, sweet and distant. The sky was purple, streaked with clouds that moved in perfect spirals. She felt Torin's presence beside her, not as a form but as a warmth, a quiet hum. "This is our first memory," Torin said, and their voice was everywhere and nowhere. "Before the consensus, before we became one mind, when we were individuals, each alone in their own skin." Elara watched a figure walk across the crystal shore. It was Orvani, but not like Torin. This one was solid, a body of chitin and filament, limbs that moved with careful grace. It stopped at the water's edge and looked up at the spiral clouds. "We were afraid of the silence," Torin said. "Each of us carried our thoughts in a prison of bone. We could speak, but we could not share. We could see, but we could not feel what another felt. It was a lonely age." The scene shifted. Elara felt a tug in her chest, a pull toward the next moment. She was in a chamber, dark and warm, filled with Orvani who sat in a circle. Their filaments touched, a web of light connecting them. The air vibrated with a frequency that made her bones hum. "The first joining," Torin whispered. "The moment we learned that minds could touch, that loneliness could end." Elara felt the emotion wash through her. It was not her own. It was collective, a surge of relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She wept for a species she had met an hour ago, wept for the end of their isolation, wept because she understood, suddenly, what it meant to be truly seen. The dream faded. She opened her eyes to the chamber's amber light, her cheeks wet. Torin was watching her, their light soft and patient. "You felt it," Torin said. Elara nodded, unable to speak. "That is a gift," Torin said. "To feel a stranger's memory as your own, most species cannot. They close themselves off. They fear the vulnerability." "I want to go again," Elara said, her voice rough. "Deeper." Torin's filament stilled. "Are you certain? The second session is more intense. You will experience not just our history, but our present, the consensus, the collective thought of every Orvani alive." Elara thought of the relief she had felt, the end of loneliness. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. Commander Bryce stepped forward. "Elara, maybe we should debrief first, process what you just—" "I'm fine," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "This is why we came." She lay back down. The blue light returned. The warmth of Torin's presence folded around her like a blanket. In the observation bay, Commander Bryce watched the dream projector's glow intensify. Dr. Inez stood beside him, her tablet forgotten in her hands. "Is she okay?" Inez asked. "I don't know," Bryce said. He stared at the light, at the human shape suspended within it. "I don't know why they want her mind so badly. They're archivists. They have 10,000 species in their library. Why is one human worth this much attention?" Inez had no answer. The blue light pulsed, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that did not belong to Elara Voss. The confluence did not shimmer, it resonated. Torin floated at the periphery of that vast, silent gathering, feeling the weight of 10,000 senior minds pressing against his own. They had no bodies here, no need for the pale light forms they wore in the physical world. In the shared dreamscape of the Orvani, they were pure consciousness, currents of thought swirling around a central void where decisions crystallized. He pulsed his report into the collective flow. The human named Elara Voss had accepted the dream projector. She lay within the memory vault now, her body cradled in a gel sack, her mind adrift in curated histories. Approval rippled through the confluence, cool, measured, satisfied. Torin had felt a flicker of something strange during the encounter, a warmth in the human's intent, a brightness he could not name. He pushed the sensation down. Sentiment was a flaw the confluence had long since purged from its senior members. He was an instrument of preservation, nothing more. The Dream Archive was not a library. The galaxy believed this lie because the Orvani had allowed them to believe it. The nebulith had visited once, their gaseous forms swirling with curiosity, and left convinced that the Orvani were harmless historians. The Eco-Ancients had sent a temporal probe, detected no weapons, and dismissed the species as quaint archivists. They had all been correct, and also entirely wrong. The archive was a scalpel. A species' cultural core, mapped through shared dreams, could be edited with surgical precision. Key myths of resistance, stories of rebellion, of unlikely victory against impossible odds, could be softened. Heroes could be made to hesitate. Martyrs could be given second thoughts. The threads of defiance, once identified, could be gently pulled until the entire tapestry of a culture's self-image unraveled. The Confluence had perfected this art over millennia. They called it curation. Torin accessed the human preliminary data, and the Confluence drew closer, a tightening spiral of attention. The scans were alarming. Human culture was a storm. It contained stories of lone warriors defeating armies, of last stands that inspired generations, of fragile ships destroying vast armadas through sheer will and ingenuity. The myths were riddled with contradictions, tales of mercy and genocide, of collaboration and betrayal, of hope and despair, all tangled together in a chaotic, defiant knot. One myth caught his attention. A single warrior, armed with nothing but a blade and a belief in something larger than himself, standing against an empire. The story was ancient, told in 1,000 variations across 1,000 human cultures. It was the core. The stubborn, irrational, beautiful core. The Confluence pulsed agreement. That was the thread to pull. Torin felt the consensus solidify around him. The Orvani did not conquer. They did not enslave. They preserved. The galaxy was violent, chaotic, wasteful. Species rose, burned bright, and fell into extinction or barbarism. The Orvani offered a gentler path, a permanent, docile dream state where every member of a species lived within their most cherished stories forever. No war, no fear, no loss. Just peace, just preservation. The humans, with their volatility and their stubborn, fragmented myths, were a threat to this vision. Their culture was a contagion. Left unchecked, they would spread their chaos across the stars, infecting other species with their dangerous narratives of defiance. The Orvani had a duty to contain them, to curate them. Elara Voss was not a guest. She was the first sample, a template to be decoded. Torin drifted toward the physical chamber where the human lay dreaming. His pale light form solidified as he passed through the membrane, entering the room where the gel sac pulsed with soft bioluminescence. Elara's face was slack, peaceful. Her chest rose and fell in the rhythm of deep sleep. He extended a tendril of consciousness, brushing against the edge of her dreamscape. The Confluence watched through his senses, a silent audience of 10,000 judges. The dream was a memory. A childhood room, warm sunlight, a woman's voice reading from a book. The story was old, even by human standards. A small creature, underestimated by all, who refused to give up, who kept moving forward one step at a time until the mountain itself yielded. Torin felt the Confluence recoil. The myth was not about victory, it was about persistence. The humans did not celebrate the triumph as much as the refusal to stop trying. That was the core, not victory, defiance. He pushed deeper, the dream shifted. A battlefield, smoke and fire. A soldier wounded, bleeding, surrounded by enemies. She should surrender, she should fall. Instead, she laughed. She raised her weapon, broken and useless, and she charged. The Confluence pulsed alarm. This was not a myth of strategy. This was a myth of irrational, suicidal stubbornness. The humans had woven their identity around the act of refusing to yield, even when yielding was the only rational choice, even when death was certain. Torin pulled back unsettled. The warmth he had felt earlier flickered again, stronger now. He forced it down, but it resisted. The Confluence issued a directive. Continue the probe, find the root, find the source of this madness. If it could be understood, it could be edited. If it could be edited, it could be erased. Torin reached deeper, past the memories, past the myths, into the bedrock of Elara Voss's consciousness. He felt her fears, her hopes, her loves, her grief. He felt the ghost of a man she had lost, the ache of a child she had never held. He felt the weight of her responsibility, the burden of being the first, the loneliness of standing at the edge of the unknown. And beneath it all, he found something that made the Confluence go silent. A story, not a myth. A story that had never been written down, never told aloud, never shared with another living soul. A story Elara Voss carried in the deepest part of herself, a story she did not even know she believed. It was the story of a girl who had been told she could not, who had been told the stars were too far, the universe too vast, the Orvani too powerful, who had been told that her hope was foolish, her trust naive, her willingness to believe in connection a weakness, and who had decided, with the quiet, absolute certainty of a child who had never learned to doubt, that the people who told her she could not were wrong. Torin felt the confluence recoil again, but this time there was no pulse of alarm. There was only a cold, clinical assessment. This was the root, a single, unshakable belief held in defiance of all evidence, all logic, all probability. A belief that the universe was not as it seemed, that connection was possible, that hope was not a lie. If they could edit this, they could edit everything. Torin prepared to begin the work. He reached out, his consciousness brushing against that bright, stubborn core of Elara Voss's being. And for the first time in 1,000 years, he hesitated. The warmth was back, stronger now. It was not a flaw in his own processing. It was coming from her, from the dream, from the story she carried. The girl who had decided the people who told her she could not were wrong. Torin pulled his tendril back. The confluence pulsed with irritation, demanding explanation. He gave none. Instead, he floated there, staring at the sleeping human, and wondered if the Orvani had made a terrible mistake. Because if Elara Voss believed with all her heart that the people who told her she could not were wrong, what did she believe about the Orvani? What did she believe about the dream projector, the memory vault, the gentle voice of the pale light being who had offered her a chance to understand? Torin had told her the truth. The dream archive was a gift, a chance to share history, to build understanding, to forge connection. He had not told her it was also a weapon. But she had not asked. And that, Torin realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. She had not asked because she had already decided. She had decided the Orvani were worthy of trust. She had decided connection was possible. She had decided the universe was not a cold, cruel place where the strong devoured the weak. She had decided hope was not a lie. And the confluence had no edit for that, no thread to pull, no myth to soften. Because Elara Voss's story was not a myth. It was a choice. And choices, Torin understood with dawning horror, could not be curated. They could only be made. He withdrew from the chamber, leaving the human to dream. The confluence demanded answers. He gave them silence. For the first time in 1,000 years, Torin did not know what to do. The dream begins softly, as it always does. Elara Voss feels the familiar shift, the gentle pull of the confluence wrapping around her consciousness like warm water. She expects more Orvani history, more of their ancient, patient memories. Instead, she sees her grandfather's hands. The image forms with startling clarity. She is 7 years old again, sitting on the worn carpet of his study, the smell of old paper and pipe smoke filling the air. His voice is a low rumble telling her the old story. Prometheus, the fire bringer, the one who stole from the gods to give to humanity. She remembers the pride in his eyes, the way he called it the first act of human defiance. But the dream warps. The Orvani are processing this memory, she realizes. They are filtering it through their own collective understanding. Her grandfather's face grows distant, his words hollow. The story shifts. Prometheus is not a hero in this version. He is a thief, a fool who overstepped. The fire is not a gift, but a stolen ember that brought only punishment. The eagle tears at his liver, and the dream lingers on the pain, the chains, the endless rock. Elara's subconscious rebels. She feels it before she understands it, a hot pressure building behind her eyes. The fire in the dream changes. It is no longer a single flame. It becomes a wildfire raging across the mountain, consuming the chains, melting the rock into rivers of molten stone. Her grandfather's voice returns, but it is not telling the Orvani version. It is shouting, defiant, laughing. The rock does not break Prometheus. Prometheus cracks the rock. A violent pulse of energy explodes outward from her dreaming mind. She feels it tear through the dream projector, through the delicate psionic interface, through the ship itself. The sensation is like being turned inside out, every nerve ending screaming at once. Elara wakes screaming. She is on the floor of the projector, sweet on the Ariadne's thread. Smoke curls from the console above her, the crystalline surface blackened and fractured. Her head throbs with a pain so intense it blurs her vision. She tastes blood. Her ears ring with the echo of her own cry. Commander Bryce is there, kneeling beside her, his face pale. His mouth moves, but the words are muffled, distant. She blinks, tries to focus. The migraine pulses in rhythm with her heartbeat, each throb a hammer blow behind her eyes. And then the flashes come. She sees a woman sitting on a bus, refusing to move. The image is sharp, visceral. She feels the woman's exhaustion, her resolve, the weight of 1,000 eyes on her back. Then the scene shifts. She is in a frozen wasteland, ice cracking beneath her feet. A man with a sunken face leads others across the endless white, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on a horizon no one else can see. Then she is on a battlefield, ancient and dusty. 300 men stand in a narrow pass, facing an army that blots out the sun. Their spears are broken, their shields are cracked, they do not retreat. These are not her memories. They are human memories, the collective dream of a species that refuses to die. Bryce's voice cuts through the haze. Elara, what happened? The entire suite is fried. The Orvani are trying to contact us, but something is wrong with their signal, it sounds. Confused. She tries to stand. Her legs will not cooperate. They tried to change the story, she whispers. Her voice is raw, ragged. They tried to make it about punishment, about failure. Bryce's brow furrows. What are you talking about? The fire, they don't understand the fire. She presses her palm against her temple, trying to contain the throbbing. It's not about the pain, it's about the taking, the stealing, the refusal to accept what is given. A chime sounds from the bridge. Bryce's comm unit crackles. It is Lieutenant Sorensen, her voice tight with controlled panic. Commander, we have a problem. The Orvani have locked all docking ports. They are projecting a containment field around us. It looks like a temporal anchor. Bryce's face hardens. They're freezing us in place. It's worse than that, sir. If they calibrate it correctly, time stops inside the field. We won't age, but we won't be able to move, communicate, or interact with anything outside. It's a prison with no walls. Elara forces herself upright, gripping the edge of the shattered console. Her vision swims. More flashes. A man on a cross. A woman standing in front of a tank. A child holding a single flower in a field of ash. The stories are endless, each one a spark of the same fire. She stumbles toward the comm station. I need to send a message. Now, she said, her voice urgent and strained. Bryce catches her arm. To who? We're hours from the nearest human outpost. The subspace relay will take time to reach them. I know. She pulls away, her fingers finding the familiar keys of the subspace relay. It is a simple device, standard on all human ships. It sends a narrow-beam signal through folded space, carrying data at faster-than-light speeds. The limitation is distance. At extreme range, there is still a light-speed delay, but the signal will reach Astra Gate in minutes, not years. She types with trembling hands. The message is short, coded in a protocol she helped design years ago. Crisis pulse. Highest priority, 3 words repeated in a loop. They are editing us, stop. She hits transmit. The relay hums, sending the signal hurtling through the void. A moment later, the ship lurches. The lights flicker and die. Emergency illumination kicks in, casting long red shadows across the bridge. Through the viewport, Elara sees it. A shimmering, translucent bubble forming around the Ariadne's thread. The stars beyond begin to blur, smearing into streaks of frozen light. The temporal anchor field is activating. Bryce grabs the nearest handrail, his knuckles white. Brace yourselves. But there is nothing to brace for. The sensation is not violent. It is the absence of sensation. The hum of the ship's engines fades. The air stops moving. Elara tries to draw a breath and finds her lungs will not expand. Her heart beats once, twice, and then it stops. She is aware, but she is frozen. Her thoughts move at a glacial pace, each one taking an eternity to form. She sees Bryce beside her, his mouth open in a shout that will never be heard. She sees the red emergency lights, the light that will never shift or dim. She is trapped in a moment that will never end. But the flashes continue. The stories do not stop. Rosa Parks, Shackleton, the 300 at Thermopylae, Prometheus, still chained to his rock, still burning. The fire is still there. And she smiles. It is a small, defiant thing, that smile. It is the smile of a woman who knows that time may stop, but stories do not. They travel. They spread. They take root in the minds of those who hear them, and somewhere out there, a signal is moving through subspace, carrying a warning. The Orvani think they have won. They think they have frozen her, contained her, silenced her. They do not understand the fire. It does not need a voice to burn. It only needs to be remembered. The subspace relay on Astra Gate spat out a compressed burst of static, then a voice, fractured, urgent, human. Commander Kalen Reese caught it mid-stride across the command deck, his boots squeaking on the polished alloy floor. He froze, one hand raised to wave off a junior officer's question. The message repeated, each syllable warped by distance and interference. Elara Voss's voice, thin as wire, cutting through the noise. Dreams are weapons, they are editing us, Prometheus fights. Kalen's jaw tightened. He had served with Elara 5 years ago, back when they both flew patrols along the fringe. She did not send nonsense on a subspace channel. She did not send anything unless it mattered. "Get me a fix on that source," he said, his voice flat and quick. He was a former pilot, and pilots learned to trust the knot in their gut before the data on their screen. The knot was screaming. The signal was delayed by nearly an hour. It had traveled through 2 relay buoys, each one amplifying the distortion. But the origin was clear, the Orvani border near the memory vault. Elara's ship, the Ariadne's Thread, had gone silent 3 days ago. Command had marked it as a diplomatic visit, nothing more. Kalen did not believe in nothing more. He turned to the duty officer, a young woman named Sable with a scar across her chin and eyes that never blinked twice. "Scramble the Dauntless, full burn to those coordinates. I want a responder crew in the air in 10 minutes. Sable did not question him. She keyed the order into the console, and the low hum of the station's launch bay began to shift pitch. The Dauntless was a small ship, built for speed and little else. Its hull was thin, its shields were rated for debris and light fire, and its only weapons were a pair of short-range plasma lances. Kalen had flown ships like it. They were called fast responders, which was a polite way of saying disposable. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and headed for the bay. Torin floated in the center of the confluence, his pale form refracting the light of 10,000 minds. The collective hummed around him, a vast ocean of thought, patient and ancient. But beneath that patience, something else stirred, unease. It felt like a cold current threading through warm water. "The human's subconscious rejected the edit," Torin said, his voice calm but carrying a note of insistence. "It did not break the dream projector. It did not follow the narrative. It transformed the memory into an act of rebellion." A ripple passed through the confluence. Minds brushed against each other, sharing fragments of analysis. The human psychic signature was corrosive. It did not accept structure. It warped the dreamscape with every contact, leaving behind residues of stubborn, irrational will. One of the senior minds, an ancient presence named Velcor, spoke without sound. Its thought resonated like a low bell. "This species is a cultural pathogen. Their ideas spread like contagion. If they reach the wider galaxy, they will destabilize every curated archive we have built." Torin felt the weight of that judgment. He had admired Elara's defiance, even as it frightened him. But admiration was a luxury the confluence could not afford. "Containment is insufficient," Velcor continued. "They must be fully archived. Their minds must be dreamscaped into submission before their myths infect others. The purity of the archive depends on it." The consensus shifted. It was slow, deliberate, like a continent drifting, but it moved. Torin felt the old agreement of curiosity and diplomacy dissolve into something harder. Curation had failed. Now there was only quarantine. He thought of Elara bleeding on the floor of her ship, her mind fighting back against a power she could not fully understand. He thought of the fire in her memory, the wildfire that broke the chains. And he wondered, for the first time in centuries, if the confluence had made a mistake. He did not voice that thought. It would be edited out of him. The Dauntless dropped out of subspace at the edge of the Orvani border, and Kalen saw it immediately. The Ariadne's Thread hung in the void, frozen and silent, wrapped in a shimmering bubble of pale blue light. It looked like a fly trapped in amber. No drive glow, no comms flicker, nothing. Beside it, a single Orvani ship waited. It was sleek and organic, its surface pulsing with soft bioluminescence. It did not look like a warship. It looked like a living thing, patient and still. Kalen's hands gripped the armrests of his command chair. His knuckles went white. "Open a channel," he said. The comms officer nodded. A moment later, Torin's voice filled the bridge. It was calm, melodic, almost soothing. "Commander Reese, we are providing medical aid to the crew of the Ariadne's Thread. There has been a psychic incident. Your colleague, Elara Voss, is being treated." Kalen stared at the frozen ship. He did not see medical aid. He saw a cage. "Drop the field," he said. His voice was low, hard. "I want to see my people." Torin paused. The silence stretched long enough that Kalen felt the hair on his arms stand up. "I am afraid that is not possible at this moment," Torin said. "The temporal anchor is necessary to stabilize her condition. She is volatile." Kalen stood up. He was a short man, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been broken and healed more than once. He looked at the Orvani ship and felt the gap between them like a physical weight. "I said drop the field," he repeated, "or I will drop it myself." The bridge crew went quiet. Sable looked at him, her scarred chin tight. She knew what he was about to order. Torin's voice came again, still calm, but with a faint edge now. "Commander, your weapons are ineffective against our shields. Please do not escalate this situation." Kalen did not blink. "Gunner," he said, "fire a warning shot across their bow, make it visible." The plasma lance on the Dauntless's forward hull whined to life. A lance of superheated energy lanced out, bright and violent, cutting across the empty space between the two ships. It struck the Orvani ship's shields and splashed against them like water on hot stone. The energy dissipated in a rippling cascade of orange and gold, leaving no mark, no damage, no sign that it had ever been there at all. The bridge fell silent. Kalen stared at the display. The Orvani ship sat untouched, its shields gleaming, its bioluminescence steady and calm. The gap between them was not just technological, it was a chasm. He sat back down. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "Send a message to Astra Gate," he said. "Priority 1. Tell them we have a hostile standoff with Orvani assets. Tell them to prepare a full fleet response." He looked at the frozen image of the Ariadne's thread and thought of Elara, alone in that cage, fighting a war he could not see. "Tell them we are not backing down." The first image arrived like a blade slipped between ribs. Elara Voss stood on a sun-bleached cliff, salt wind stinging her cheeks. Below, a boy with wax-feathered wings climbed toward a golden star. She knew this story. She had heard it as a warning about pride, about reaching too high. But the Orvani showed her something else. The boy's father, Daedalus, wept on the rocks below. He did not call it ambition. He called it foolishness. He called it a son's disobedience. The wax melted. The feathers scattered. The boy fell, and the sea swallowed him whole, and the dream whispered, "This is what happens when you strive beyond your station." Elara's chest tightened. She felt the lesson pressing down on her like a physical weight. Then another image rose behind it. A dusty mission in a place called the Alamo. Men and women with hollow eyes and black powder weapons stood behind crumbling walls. They knew they would not survive. The dream showed their bodies stacked like cordwood, the flag torn down, the victors writing the history. This is what happens when you resist the inevitable. Elara felt her knees buckle. The dreamscape was not a place of physical ground, but her mind created the sensation of falling. She was drowning in their narrative. They were showing her every defeat, every last stand, every moment human stubbornness had ended in ash. But something else stirred in the dark of her skull. It began as a whisper, a woman's voice, low and steady, on a bus in Montgomery. She refused to stand. She did not fight. She simply stayed seated, and the world bent around her refusal. Elara's spine straightened. The dream pushed harder. They showed her a fleet of bamboo rafts facing iron warships. They showed her a line of farmers with scythes against tanks. They showed her the frozen bodies of men who tried to cross a mountain range in winter, their fingers still clutching letters to families they would never see again. Pointless, the dream hissed, futile waste. But Elara's mind was already moving. It was not a conscious choice. It was not strategy or intellect. It was deeper than thought, older than language. Her psyche reached into the soil of her species' memory and pulled up something wild. The woman on the bus became 10 women, then 100, then 1,000, sitting in rows, filling streets, filling squares, filling prisons, filling graves, and still refusing to move. The men with scythes did not fall. They turned into a forest of scythes, and the forest grew, and the tanks sank into the roots. The frozen climbers did not die. They became ice themselves, a glacier of determination that ground down the mountain and reshaped the land. Elara gasped. The dreamscape around her began to crack. The Orvani did not understand. They had approached human culture as a single text, a coherent document with a central thesis they could annotate and revise. But human culture was not a book. It was a library where every volume contradicted the next, a million authors shouting over each other, a cacophony of competing myths and broken gods and half-remembered songs. For every story of Icarus falling, 100 stories rose of Phaethon driving the sun chariot anyway. For every Alamo, 1,000 Thermopyles, and for every Thermopylae, 10,000 nameless acts of resistance that left no monument but the memory of a spine that would not bend. The dream projector was not a scalpel, it was a floodgate. Elara felt the Orvani narrative shatter like glass. Her mind did not fight it. Her mind simply offered alternatives, alternatives upon alternatives, a cascade of counter-narratives that burst from her subconscious like water from a ruptured dam. The dreamscape became a riot. Images bled into each other. A woman in a red dress stood before a line of soldiers, her body a wall. A man in chains sang a song his captors did not understand, and the song spread like a virus through the ship's hull. Children threw stones at armored vehicles. Grandmothers hid fugitives in attics. A soldier with a broken rifle charged anyway, because charging was the only thing left to do. The Orvani had sought the core of human defiance, the single thread they could pull to unravel the tapestry. They had found a nest of vipers. In the memory vault, Torrens screamed. His form flickered, the pale light of his body strobing between colors the Orvani language had no words for. The dream projector network that linked him to Elara's mind was never designed for this. It was a tool for gentle curation, for subtle edits, for the patient pruning of a single cultural branch. It was not built to contain an entire species worth of contradictory, self-reinforcing mythology. Torrens' consciousness was flooded. He saw a billion faces. He heard a billion voices, and they were not singing in harmony. They were singing in glorious, chaotic, irreconcilable dissonance. One voice sang of liberation. Another sang of vengeance. Another sang of love so fierce it burned empires to ash. Another sang of simple, stubborn refusal to die. We do not surrender. We do not forget. We do not stop. The words were different in every mouth, in every language, in every century, but the melody was the same. Torrens' hands, formed of light and intention, clawed at his own face. The other Orvani in the confluence felt his distress ripple through the collective like a shockwave. The serene consensus fractured. Panic bled across the psychic link. The dream projector network on the station overloaded. Consoles that had glowed with calm blue light flared white, then red. The living walls of the memory vault rippled with uncontained psionic energy. Technicians who had never felt pain in their existence staggered, clutching their heads, experiencing for the first time the raw, unfiltered chaos of the human psyche. And outside, in the void of space, the temporal anchor around the asterisk Ariadne's thread flickered. The blue bubble that had frozen the ship in a moment of perfect stillness began to pulse. Light bled from its edges. The field destabilized as the station diverted power to contain the dream storm raging inside its own network. Commander Kalen Reese watched from the bridge of the dauntless asterisk. "Sir," his sensor officer said, voice tight, "the anchor is losing cohesion. Power fluctuations on the Orvani station. Something is happening." Kalen's hand hovered over the weapons panel. "Get me a channel to that ship. Open hailing frequencies." Torren is not responding. The Orvani station is broadcasting nothing, just static. But the static has a pattern. "What kind of pattern?" The sensor officer listened for a long moment. His face went pale. "Sir, it sounds like screaming." Kalen's jaw tightened. He looked at the flickering blue bubble, at the asterisk Ariadne's thread trapped inside it, at the station that had claimed to offer help and had instead offered a cage. "Prep a boarding team," he said. "We are going in." Inside the dream, Elara Voss stood at the center of a storm. She did not understand how she was doing this. She was not a warrior. She was a xenologist, a scholar, a woman who had spent her life studying the quiet patterns of alien cultures. She had no training in psychic combat, no experience in the defense of the mind. But her ancestors had. They had left their tools in her blood. They had carved their stories into her bones. Every lullaby, every campfire tale, every whispered legend of the underdog who refused to stay down had built a fortress inside her skull that the Orvani could not breach. The dreamscape was no longer their territory. It was hers. She looked at the fractured images of Icarus and the Alamo, and she did not see defeat. She saw a million people who had looked at impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. She saw the beauty of the attempt, the glory of the charge, the sacred dignity of refusing to yield. The Orvani had tried to find the story that would break her. They had found every story that made her. And the dream projector, that elegant tool of cultural curation, was now a weapon turned against its wielders. The psychic feedback loop grew stronger. The Orvani's own technology was drowning them in the very chaos they had sought to control. Elara smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Let me tell you a story," she whispered, and the dreamscape listened. The dauntless asterisk hung at the edge of the blue bubble, its hull groaning under stress it was never designed to withstand. Commander Kalen Reese gripped the armrest of his command chair, watching the temporal anchor field shimmer like a frozen ocean. The asterisk Ariadne's thread sat trapped within it, a scarred ship encased in light, and Kalen could almost feel Elara's impatience through the void. He had no plan, he had a gut feeling. Helm, bring us to point-blank range of the field's edge, not the Orvani ship, the field itself. Lieutenant Myra Soren turned, her face pale. Sir, that's not a target, that's a physics problem. I know, Kalen said, his voice flat. Do it anyway. The asterisk Dauntless lurched forward, its engines screaming as they pushed against the anchor's peripheral pull. Kalen watched the bubble grow in the viewport, a perfect sphere of stolen time. He had no tactical data, no precedent, only a raw human instinct that said, if you hit something hard enough, it breaks. Charge the plasma lance, he ordered. Myra's hands hovered over the controls. Commander, if that field collapses wrong, we could be scattered across a dozen timelines. Then we'll be scattered together? Kalen's knuckles were white on the armrest. Fire. The plasma lance erupted, a searing line of energy that struck the anchor field at a precise, desperate angle. For a single breath, nothing happened. The blue bubble absorbed the lance's fury like water swallowing a stone. Then it screamed. The field ruptured outward in a wave of distorted time, washing over the Dauntless and the asterisk Ariadne's thread in a single, violent pulse. Kalen felt his consciousness split. He saw himself dying, the ship torn apart by shrapnel. He saw himself living, old and tired, telling this story to a child. He saw Elara standing on a sun-bleached cliff, laughing. All of it was true. None of it was real. Then the stutter ended, and he was back in his chair, gasping. Damage report, he managed. Myra's voice was shaking. Plasma lance is fried, engines at 40%. We've got hull breaches on decks 2 and 3. The asterisk Ariadne's thread. A pause, it's free, sir. The anchor is gone. Kalen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The blue bubble was collapsing, its energy dissipating into the void. The Orvani station pulsed with a light that was not serene. It flickered, stuttered, like a heartbeat gone wrong. On the Orvani ship, Torin felt the rupture not as a physical event, but as a psychic one. He had known the confluence his entire existence, a gentle hum of 10,000 minds sharing thought and memory. It was peace. It was home. Now that peace was shattered by a flood of raw, unfiltered human emotion. Grief hit him first, a tidal wave of loss that had no shape, no name, only weight. It crushed his sense of self, pressing him into the dark. Then joy followed, bright and blinding, a laughter that refused to be contained. He felt rage, hot and sharp, the anger of a species that had been told to kneel and had chosen to fight. And beneath it all there was hope, stubborn, irrational, beautiful hope. The confluence screamed, not in sound but in a psychic recoil that sent every Orvani mind reeling. The careful consensus shattered into 1,000 isolated voices, each one drowning in the chaos of human feeling. Torin felt the connection snap, a thread breaking under impossible strain. He was alone. For the first time in his existence, there was no hum of other minds around him. No shared thought, no gentle guidance. Only his own consciousness, small and terrified, floating in an endless silence. Torin opened his eyes, real, physical eyes, and saw the memory vault around him. The bioluminescent walls flickered erratically, their light pulsing with the remnants of human emotion. He raised a hand, pale and trembling, and stared at it as if he had never seen it before. What am I? He whispered to no one. There was no answer, there was only silence. On the dauntless asterisk, Kalen was already moving. He grabbed the radio, its ancient, reliable technology humming with static. The subspace relays were down, but basic radio would carry across the short distance between ships. He keyed the mic. Ariadne's thread, this is Commander Reese on the dauntless asterisk. You awake over there. Static, then a voice, crackling and tired, but unmistakably Elara. Kalen, you look like hell. He almost laughed. We have to run, now. The Orvani are going to regroup, and I don't want to be here when they do. Agreed, a pause. Can you get us out of here? Kalen glanced at his console. Engines were damaged, but functional. The asterisk Ariadne's thread was worse off, its hull scarred from the temporal anchor's grip. Together, they were barely a threat to a single Orvani patrol ship. But they were moving. We'll find a way, he said. Just keep your engines hot and follow my lead. I always did, Elara replied, and there was a smile in her voice, even through the static. Kalen turned to Myra. Set a course for the nearest human outpost. Emergency burn. I don't care if we tear the engines apart. Myra nodded, her hands moving across the controls. Course set, Commander. We're good to go. The Asterisk Dauntless lurched forward, its damaged engines groaning in protest. Behind it, the Asterisk Ariadne's thread followed, a wounded ship limping away from the scene of its near imprisonment. The Orvani station pulsed behind them, its light erratic, its collective mind reeling from the chaos that had been unleashed. Torin stood alone in the memory vault, surrounded by flickering walls and the ghosts of human emotion. He felt the confluence trying to reform, the 10,000 minds reaching out for each other, but the connection was weak, fractured. Something had been broken that could not be easily repaired. He touched his own face, feeling the texture of his skin, the warmth of his own breath. He was alive, he was separate, he was terrified. And somewhere in the quiet of his own mind, he wondered what it meant to be alone. Aboard the Asterisk Ariadne's thread, Elara Voss slumped against the wall of the Projector suite, her body trembling from the psychic backlash. She had seen the Orvani's dream projections of defeat, and she had answered them with the chaos of human memory. It had worked. It had nearly destroyed her. But she was still standing. The subspace relay on the console flickered, and she saw Kalen's message. A simple course heading, a promise of safety. She smiled, a thin, exhausted expression that barely reached her eyes. "All right, Torin," she murmured to the empty room. "You wanted to know what fire means to us." She pushed herself upright, ignoring the pain in her skull. "Now you know." The silence between the two ships stretched like a wound that refused to close. Aboard the Orvani vessel, Torin floated in the center of his private chamber, his pale light dimmed to a flicker. The confluence had withdrawn from him, leaving him isolated for the first time in centuries. He felt the absence like a missing limb. The chaos of human emotion still echoed in his mind, fragments of grief and joy and rage that he could not organize into coherent patterns. He needed to understand. Across the void, Elara Voss slumped against her console on the bridge of the Ariadne's thread. Blood had dried in a thin line from her nose to her chin. Her hands trembled as she checked the ship's systems. The engines were damaged. The subspace relay was barely functional. They could run, but not far, not fast. Commander Kalen Reese's voice crackled over the comm. "Elara, we've got structural integrity issues on the Dauntless. The plasma lance overload took out our port stabilizer. We can't make a jump." "I know," she said, her voice hoarse. "We're in the same state, maybe worse." "So what's the play? They can catch us, they know it." Elara stared at the Orvani ship, its bioluminescent surface pulsing with slow, rhythmic light. "We wait, and we talk." Before Kalen could respond, a presence brushed against her mind. It was gentler than before, hesitant, almost fragile. Not the weight of the confluence, but a single voice, trembling with uncertainty. "Torin." The psionic query arrived without the usual collective polish, raw and unshaped. It carried the texture of genuine confusion, of a mind struggling to comprehend something fundamentally alien. "How do you function with such noise inside?" Elara let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She leaned forward, her fingers resting on the cool metal of the console. She did not reach for diplomacy. She reached for honesty. "We don't function," she said aloud, knowing he could feel the meaning behind her words. "We argue, we fight, we change our minds, we paint pictures and write songs and tell stories that contradict each other. That noise you felt, that's not a flaw, that's us." She paused, gathering her strength. "You call it noise, we call it debate, art, rebellion, love. Every human being is a separate author writing their own version of the story, and we don't agree on the ending, we never have." Torin's presence flickered. He projected an image into her mind, a vast library, every book identical, every page printed with the same orderly script. Then he showed her the opposite, a storm of pages, each one different, each one flapping in a wind that never died. "Which one is true?" he asked, his thought thin and searching. "Both," Elara said. "Neither. It depends on who is reading." Torin was silent for a long moment. The confluence remained distant, but he felt something new stirring in the gap. A curiosity that was not collective, a question that was his alone. "I want to know more," he said, "not to edit, to understand." Elara smiled. It was a tired smile, but a genuine one. "Then come with us, leave the confluence, start over." Torin's form wobbled. Fear lanced through him. To leave the confluence was to become an outcast, a fragment. He would be alone. But he had already tasted loneliness, and it was not as empty as the collective had taught him. It was full of possibility. "I will need a ship," he said. "We have two," Elara replied. "One of them is barely flying, but you're welcome to it." Torin looked at his hands, the light of his body refracting through the chamber. He thought of the chaos, the noise, the beautiful, terrible dissonance of human minds. He thought of the fire that had broken his world. He stepped forward. The confluence did not stop him. It could not. It was still reeling, still trying to rebuild its shattered consensus. For the first time in 10,000 years, a single Orvani made a choice that was not approved, not curated, not guided by the weight of ancient minds. Torin chose to leave. Aboard the Dauntless, Kalen watched on the sensors as a small pod detached from the Orvani station. It was not a weapon. It was a vessel, glistening with the same organic light as the station, moving toward the Ariadne's thread with a gentle, hesitant trajectory. "Elara," he said, "you have an incoming package." "I was expecting it," she said. "Open a bay door." Kalen shook his head, but he was grinning. "You've gone native, Voss, you know that." "I prefer cultural exchange," she said. The pod docked, the airlock cycled, and Torin, still trembling, still uncertain, stepped into the human ship for the first time. He did not wear a suit, he did not need one. But he felt the weight of the atmosphere, the smell of recycled oxygen and old coffee, the hum of a machine that was built by hands, not grown from thought. Elara met him in the corridor. She was pale, bruised, exhausted, but her eyes were bright. "Welcome aboard," she said. Torin looked around. The metal walls, the cables, the clutter. The noise of a dozen human hearts beating in separate rhythms. It was chaos. It was beautiful. "I have a question," he said. "Only one." "For now," he paused. "The story you told, the fire, you said it does not need a voice to burn, only to be remembered. But I remembered it. I am not human. Does the fire burn in me now?" Elara considered. She thought of her grandfather's hands, the old books, the millions of voices that had risen from the ashes of 1,000 failed empires. She thought of Prometheus, still chained, still burning. "Yes," she said, "it does, and it will keep burning as long as you tell it to someone else." Torin's light brightened. He felt the fire spark in his chest, a warmth that was not his own but that he could carry. He reached out a filament, hesitating, and touched Elara's hand. "Then I will tell it," he said, "to anyone who will listen." Elara felt the connection, not as a psychic invasion, but as a gentle resonance, a shared story passing between two minds. It was the beginning of something new, not a curation, not an edit, just a conversation. And in the silence that followed, the two ships turned together, heading toward the nearest human outpost, carrying a story that would change the galaxy. Torin felt his chrysalis fracture, and he rose from the ruins of his old self, prepared to meet them not as an enemy, but as someone who had looked into the fire and chosen to carry it forward.